Thank you so much for hosting this event. She's more brave than I am. My sukkah is also, I don't understand how a quarter of the size of this one in the same house. It's like the Beis Hamikdash. It just grows and grows with, the space that you need. But thank you for this. Everybody looks forward to it. And I knew when you would post the poll that it would be like in like 2 minutes, whereas for all the other classes, we wait like 5 hours till somebody clicks, yes, I'm coming. So that was a good sign. We're going to do something a little bit different today because Ruth and I we don't coordinate that well. She tells me in general what she's going to talk about, and then I hope and pray that we don't prepare the same class, So I thought I'm going to try and do something that's a little different. And I also know that English is not everybody's first language here, and sometimes for people who English is not their first language, reading along, visual learners, easier. So today, instead of me giving you a lecture, we're going to learn something together. And then afterwards, I wanted to share something really interesting about Parshat Bereshit that's coming up, first Parsha of the week. But today we're going to learn about something else. We're going to learn about something called Simchat Bet HaShoeva, which is a tradition that we have on the intermediate days of Sukkot, on the evenings of Chol HaMoed Sukkot. There's big celebrations. I'm sure some of you've seen some of the flyers for the different activities that are happening in all the different communities at night. Я думала об этом, потому что я думаю, что много не знает. Почему это не просто потому что Sukkot, потому что как бы ханукальный фестиваль, это вообще not the same thing. So I made a bunch of booklets, but not enough, clearly. So share some booklets. In this booklet are sources so that when we're reading together, we're going to learn together, and maybe somebody will be happy to offer to read out loud, maybe. But okay, great. There's like 25 here, so you shouldn't have to share that many. But I'll send some this way, and then you'll take and pass. And while you're taking and passing, I'm gonna play a little song that I believe most of you know.
On the roof.
Somebody knows
Sounds
it?
Crazy, no? But
Yes.
here in our little village of Anatevka, you might say every one of us is a fiddler on the roof, trying to scratch out a pleasant, simple tune without breaking his neck. It isn't easy.
Listen what he says.
You may ask, why do we stay up there if it's so dangerous?
Why do we stay there if it's so dangerous? And what does he
We
say?
stay because Anatevka is our home.
Not yet.
And how do we keep our balance?
How do we keep our balance?
That I can tell you in one word. Tradition.
Tradition. I'll spoil you the rest, even though I love it. So, actually, in the introduction in your booklets, I think you have a copy of it as well. If not, I'll read it. He says, for instance, we always keep our heads covered and we always wear a little prayer shawl, and this shows our constant devotion to God. You may ask, how does this tradition get started? And I'll tell you, I don't know, but it's a tradition. And because of our traditions, every one of us knows who he is and what God expects him to do. I'm not sure if they put that in the student book.
No.
They didn't. Okay, so I read it instead of listening. I thought you were bored. Even Tevya knew that traditions, and everyone in his little town of Anatevka knew that traditions is the glue that held them together. So Simchat Bet HaShoeva is really all about traditions. In the Torah portion, where Moshe commands the Jewish people a lot of different mitzvahs, but he commands them like in Deuteronomy, such as the prohibition against worshiping idols and the rules of kosher meats, etc. He proceeds to list the holidays, все праздники и все, что надо делать на каждый праздник. И когда он говорит про Sukkot, when he talks about the holiday of Sukkot, he emphasizes the joy of Sukkot. That the mitzvah and the ritual that is needed for Sukkot is joy. So if you look into your first one, I'll read the first one to give you some life, and then you're going to help me. You shall rejoice on your festival along with your son and daughter, your servant, your maidservant, the Levite, proselyte, orphan, and widow from your settlements. Celebrate to God your Lord for 7 days in a place that God will choose, since God will then bless you in all your agricultural and happy and other endeavors, so that you will only happy. If you look at the Hebrew, if you read Hebrew, it says V'samachta b'chagecha, right? That's the holiday. What holiday? Какой праздник здесь говорит Moshe? Про Sukkot. And in Sukkot, it is in fact a very joyous holiday. Да? Он реально очень веселый праздник. And interestingly, there was a very specific custom in the temple, in the Bet HaMikdash, that was at the center of the joy of Sukkot. Что именно дал вот это счастливо для этого праздник? Это было на иврит, well, let's just say in English. In English, it's the water libation. It's the drawing of the water. Every day in the Bet HaMikdash, wine was poured in a very special hole in the Mizbeach, on the altar, when they would give a karban, an animal sacrifice. And this ritual, the service, was called the Niso Chayayim, pouring of the wine. Каждый день в храм, когда они сдали этот карбан, там было вино, маленькую дырку, и они сыпали туда вино. And on Sukkot, there was an additional ritual when they were doing the karbanot, not just the wine, они добавили туда тоже вода. They also added their water. На Sukkot добавили вода, не только вино, на этом ritual. How do you say ritual? Ritual. Should have known that. You want to read the next source? Let's read inside. We're learning, this is what it means to learn inside the text. So I don't think we've ever done that as a group before. So let's do that. So
the water libation?
Yeah.
How was the water libation performed? A golden jug with a capacity of 3
log is a biblical measurement.
Was filled from the Siloam pool. When they reached the gate of the water, they sounded the tikwa, tirua,
Tekiah, trua, and a tekiah. They sounded the shofar when they reached the Siloam pool.
The priest ascended the ramp of the altar and turned to his left. 2 silver basins were there, perforated at the bottom with 2 nose-like
protrusions.
One had a broad perforation and one had a thin perforation, so that the flow of both the water and the wine, which do not have the same viscosity, would conclude simultaneously. The basin on the west was for water, and the basin on the east was for the wine.
So you just learned the words inside of how the ritual was done. Как они это сделали. And so interesting to think about the holes, even this minute detail. One hole was bigger, one was smaller, because wine and water flow at a different speed, and when they flow down, it flowed the same together simultaneously on purpose. So this unique ceremony on Sukkot was held with a lot of pomp and celebration. Every night of Sukkot, a massive party was held in the Bet HaMikdash with music and dancing and crowds and masses of people. And at dawn, the entire crowd would head down to the Siloam pool, where the vessels for the altar were filled up, and then they were brought to the temple for pouring. То есть все это сделано было очень большой, big deal. Много, как огромные parties, музыка, танцевали, все пришли. Там было огромное количество людей. И танцевали, и вот праздновали целой ночью. And when they got to the dawn, когда утром, how do you say dawn? What's dawn? No. That. Они все вместе ушли в этом бассейн. What's the word? Черпали в воде и ушли обратно в храм. Сыпались и все сделали. And it was a huge, big deal. It was a very joyous event. So the Mishnah describes what this event was like. Do you want to read from the Mishnah? Source 3.
Whoever did not see the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the celebration of the place of the drawing, has never seen real celebration. At the conclusion of the first day of the festival, the women's courtyard, the main temple courtyard, would undergo significant repair. Golden candelabras were set up, each with 4 basins of gold at its top and 4 ladders for each pole. 4 young priests would take pitchers with a capacity of 120 ml of oil and pour them into each basin. The light was so bright that there wasn't a courtyard in Jerusalem that wasn't illuminated from the light of the Sukkot Beit HaShoeva. The pious men and leaders would dance before the crowd while juggling flaming torches, and they would say passages of song and praise. The Levites would play on lyres, harps, cymbals, and trumpets, and countless musical instruments. While standing on the 15 stairs descending from the Israelites' courtyard to the women's courtyard, which correspond to the 15 songs of the ascents and psalms.
So imagine, like, this scene, huge. The Beis HaMikdash was huge. And has anybody been to ancient Rome, where you can see like the ruins of the temples? They were pretty big. And they're when you're standing there and you see how great, you start to understand, lahavdil, what does it mean? This, and the Beit HaMikdash was more grandiose and even more huge than that. Храм был огромный, самый большой, самый красивый храм вообще, который был. То есть, подумай, or how do you say imagine? Представьте. Oh, that's what it means? Представьте тебе, представьте. Oh, that's what it means. Okay, so представьте себе what it looked like, these 15 big, beautiful steps, covered, все левиты там стояли, инструменты, песенки, everybody's dancing and the whole night long. And there's just the women's, and it describes here that they built these balconies for women in the courtyard so that they can watch and see, and everybody was there. So the Talmud asks, what is the source of the joy in the celebration? From where are these matters derived? And Rav Alina says that it is as the verse states, with joy you shall draw water out of the springs of salvation. A quote from Yeshayahu. A verse in Yeshayahu speaks about the drawing water with joy. That is the biblical context to the custom. Okay, so why are they drawing this with joy? Because Yeshayahu states, you shall draw the water with joy, and this is the ritual of drawing the water. So the Rebbe has something more to share. The Rebbe has a deeper thought for us in this concept. Does anybody want to read loud? Oh, great. Yana's going to read where it says the Rebbe. What is the meaning of the celebration?
The Talmud asks, what is the source for the elaborate celebration of the water libation and the Simchat Beit HaShoeva? It answers by citing a verse. With joy you shall draw water out of the springs of salvation, indicating that this verse refers to the water libation of Sukkot and commands that the drawing be done with joy. For this reason, we find that the primary celebration took place at the drawing of the water and not when it was actually poured on the altar. However, the verse only indicates that the drawing should be a joyous occasion, while the Mishnah and the Talmud says much more. Whoever did not see the Simchat Beit HaShoeva has never seen a real celebration. The act of drawing water evoked such joy that it outshined all other celebrations, even the joy of the holiday itself. This raises a question. The obligation to be joyful in the holiday is a biblical commandment with a clear verse in the Torah, you shall rejoice on your festival. On the other hand, the verse in Isaiah, with joy you shall draw water, is not exclusively associated with this Sukkot celebration. Our sages understood the verse as a reference to this custom only because there is no other ritual in which water is drawn. Nonetheless, the joy during the drawing of the water, based on an extrapolation from Isaiah, seems greater than the holiday joy, which is an explicit biblical commandment. This raises the question, why? What is the source for this tradition?
So the actual biblical commandment that we read first in the beginning, когда мы читали начало, что написано в Торе, как надо отмечать Sukkot с joy, это все, что было написано. In Yeshayahu that he read, it says, but the drawing of the water, you never saw anything happier than that. Больше чем это, ты не видишь что-то счастье. Why is it that the tradition, а почему традиционно вот этом ritual более радость идет даже чем праздник его сам. So what is it, the source for this tradition? What is it about this tradition? So to understand this, we're going to look at a similar situation that is on the holiday of Pesach. On Pesach, there was a special karban offering known as the Minchat HaOmer, the Omer offering. Это было специально карбан для праздник Pesach. Это было сделано, чтобы начинать читать Omer. This offering of the karban HaOmer was to commemorate and to mark the beginning of the counting of the Omer. And the Torah is very explicit about this offering and tells us when to offer it. Torah очень чисто написано, когда дает это карбан. Between Passover and Shavuot. Между Pesach и Shavuot. Ну, когда точно, when exactly, there's a little argument about it. Они немножко ревнуют. Когда. These are God's festivals. Можешь читать со мной. Source 4. These are God's festivals that you must celebrate as sacred holidays at their appropriate times. This is a source from the Torah in Leviticus. Then, on the 15th of that month, it is God's festival of matzahs, when you eat matzahs for 7 days. What holiday? Какой праздник? Pesach. И там написано точно, в 15-го в этом месяц. It says very clearly, the 15th of the month, that's when Pesach starts. There's no arguing. From this verse, we know that Pesach begins on the 15th of the month. And the verse keeps going and says, speak to the Jews and say to them, when you come to the land that I am giving you, and you reap its harvest, you must bring an omer of your first reaping to the priest. The omer is the measurement. Okay? А потом дальше написано, что когда вы идете в Израиле, how do you say reap the harvest? And you reap the harvest. You reap the harvest. That. You need to bring an omer of the harvest to the Kohanim. And you take this omer, the priest, the Kohen, is going to wave it before Hashem so that it will be acceptable to you, and he shall wave it on the day after the Shabbat. So what does the Torah say? This omer you're bringing the day after Shabbat. Там написано в Torah, это omer, минхат omer ты даешь день после Shabbat. Какой Shabbat? Когда Shabbat? Which Shabbat? Here's where the argument comes a little bit in. The commandment to bring the Omer offering, the Torah says it has to be brought after a Shabbat. And it continues to say, you shall then, after you bring the Omer, you shall then count 7 complete weeks after the day following the Shabbat when you brought the Omer as a wave offering, until the day after the 7th week when there will be a total of 50 days, and then you shall present new grain as a meal offering to God. А дальше написано, потом ты даешь вот это омер день после Шаббат, а потом читайте еще 7 неделю, а потом в этом день, 50th day, 50th, yep, that day will be Shavuot, okay? This very day shall be celebrated as a sacred holiday when no work may be done. This is an eternal law for all generations, no matter where you may live. This is a reference to the holiday of Shavuot. Это говорит про Shavuot, который мы отмечаем, how do you say 50? 50 дней после Omer. So let's think about this for a minute. The date of Pesach is clear. Date of Pesach очень чисто, очень ясно. Да? 15-го Nisan. The holiday of Shavuot, тоже очень clear, is also very explicit. When is it? 50 days after the offering of the Omer. The question is, when exactly is this Minchat Omer? Вопрос это, когда точно это Omer? Когда мы начинаем с этим Omer? Когда это день после Shabbat? Какой Shabbat? What exactly does the Torah mean on the day after Shabbat? And our sages, wait, I know that one, наши мудрости, мудрецы, okay, да, я правильно сказала. Anyway, they had an oral tradition that the word Shabbat in this verse is not literally Shabbat, like the 7th day of the week when we don't work, but rather a reference to the first day of Pesach. То есть наши мудрецы говорят, что когда Тора пишет Shabbat, Бог не умел термин, да? Не умел в виду Shabbat, как мы знаем Shabbat, 7-й день в неделю, это был первый день Pesach. And it tells us to bring the Omer offering on the second day of the holiday and then to count 50 days until Shavuot. Когда Omer Dayot, Afteroi Din Pesach. When do we bring the Omer? On the second day of Pesach. Why? Because Shabbat is referring to the first day of Pesach. So everything is pretty clear. First day of Pesach is the 15th. The offering of the Omer is the second day of Pesach, the 16th, when we mark the counting of the Omer. 50 days later, it's Shavuot. However, all was not so well. During the period of the Second Temple, various groups rejected the idea of oral tradition. Было разные группы, которые были против Torah shebal peh, oral tradition. We have Torah shebechtav. This is the Torah, the actual Torah, and then we have Torah shebal peh, which is the midrashim, the sages, the chachamim, Talmud, Navi, all of that. There was a group. They were the Betusim. They were an aristocratic group of priests. They were Kohanim that did not believe. They had three basic principles that they did not agree with. The Chachamim, which were that they did not believe in reward and punishment. This is an aspect of the Torah that we know exists. They did not believe in Tchiyat HaMesim, resurrection of the dead, and they did not believe. And they also took the Torah very literally, ignoring the oral tradition of the Torah. So this is what made up these three principles, set them aside, and they were against this oral tradition. Они были против это, how do you say, устная традиционная. И они решили, что Шаббат значит Шаббат после Pesach. So they would start counting the Omer the first Sunday after the Shabbat of Pesach, which means that Shavuot fell out every year on a different day. So what does the Rebbe tell us? We can answer the question, I'm reading on the bottom where it says the fanfare of the Omer offering. We can answer the question with the following preface. We found a similar concept regarding Pesach. We can go back and answer our question, why is the drawing of the water in the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, why is that even more, why was that the crux of the joy of Sukkot? We find a similar situation in Pesach, the Rebbe says. In fact, the months of Nisan and Tishrei are considered counterparts. Tishrei is the beginning of the year, while Nisan is the beginning of the months. And their respective holidays, Sukkot and Passovers, have many similarities. Pesach has a very public ritual, the reaping of the Omer, on the second evening of the holiday. The Mishnah says that all the nearby townspeople would gather so that the reaping would be carried out with great fanfare. Там Mishnah пишет, что все пришли вокруг, когда они начинали читать вот это Омер, когда они раздали вот это Минхат Омер, это было big deal. То же самое, как вот с водой. Once it grew dark, he would say to the assembled, did the sun set? They would respond, yes. Shall I reap the sheaves with the sickle? And everyone would say, yes. Shall I place the gathered sheaves in this basket? Yes. Shall I cut the sheaves? Yes. And the emissary asked 3 times with regard to each question. And everybody, the whole huge crowd would say, yes, yes, yes. And the reason the reaping was held with such a great big deal, почему это было такой big deal? The Mishnah explains, why was all this done? Due to the Beitusim, so they would not say the harvest of the Omer does not take place after the first day of Pesach, because they maintain that Shabbat in the verse is to be interpreted literally. Потому что они решили, что все, что написано в Торе, надо понять без помочь нашим мудрецам, и они были против этого. So because of that, the publicity was created to reject the Beitusim's interpretation and underscore that the 16th of Nisan was the proper time for the Omer harvest. То есть они все это сделали не случайно, а особенно, специально, чтобы показывать все, чтобы 16 это правильный день собрать и дать Минхат Омер. An ordinary offering similar to the offerings brought during daily in the temple, they surrounded this specific offering with such a big deal, even the preparations for the offering with the express purpose of making a point against the Beitusim. Реально, это offering, это Минхат Омер было ничего не очень специально, не было очень другая, чем что они сделали каждый день в храме. It wasn't such a big difference between this Omer offering and all the other Omer offering they did every single day. But they specifically made a big deal so that they were proving and making a point to say this Omer is done on this day. So, and not only that, but even the preparation for the offering was a big deal. How he would ask 3 times, should I cut it? Should we, is it dawn? Is it dark? Is it this? Everything was such a big deal just to prove that the Omer's proper, what the proper day of Omer was, to disprove the Beitusin. So now we could come back to our water drawing. So the custom of the drawing of the water isn't stated explicitly in the Torah, as we mentioned before. It was an oral tradition that was passed down from Moshe through generations. And Rabbi Akiva explains the custom as follows. Someone bored of my voice yet? Somebody else want to volunteer to read? Ani, you want to read? Source 5. Tell us what Rabbi Akiva says.
Rabbi Akiva said, the Torah said, bring an omer of barley on Passover, the season of barley, so that the grain shall be blessed for you. Bring wheat and first fruits on Shabbat, the season of the trees, so that the fruit will be blessed for you. Bring the water libation on Sukkot, so that you will be blessed with rains.
So in this context of Rabbi Akiva's explanation, it could be understood that it was a seasonal offering. Если мы читаем, как Rabbi Akiva объясняет, это seasonal offering. Every season, каждый сезон имеет свою offering, свой карбан, да? And the drawing of the water is sort of the offering that marks the start of the rainy season. Это сезон дождь. But this custom was also rejected in these groups. And in this case, this group is the Tzedokim, and it's not really clear if the Tzedokim were associated with the Beitusin or if it was an offshoot or not, but they were also a similar or part of the same group that rejected the oral Torah that was given down from generation to generation. And what happened? One year, the priest appointed to carry out the water drawing was a priest from the group of the Tzedokim. And instead of following the protocol and pouring the water in the altar, he poured the water on his leg. And the masses of people in the temple were furious and enraged, and they immediately started to express their anger, as we will read in the next source. And from that year and onward, the priest was asked to lift his hand before every single time to show that he's going to pour it in the right place. And he was doing the process correctly. So in the next source, we'll read together what happens. The appointee says to the one pouring the water, raise your hand. As one time a priest poured the water on his feet, and the people stoned him with their etrog's. Один раз, вот один из этого прист, Kohanim, который был из этого группа, да, Цидоким, он решил сделать по-другому, потому что он не верил. Все это дела, и он сыпал этот водой на ноги вместо этой дырки. И из этого началась новая традиция, и надо было поднять руки и сначала показывать, что он будет правильно сделать, и не в другом месте. And with this in mind, the Rebbe says, we can understand the meaning behind the great celebration of Simchat Bet HaShoeva. Я читаю где написано the Rebbe. The water libation is not explicitly written in the written Torah. Там не написано в Torah specifics. And therefore, the Tzedokim rejected it. Потому что не было написано в Torah точно, они решили, что это не важно. The Talmud relates that the priest was told to raise his hand while pouring so that everyone will be able to see it, because a Tzedoki priest once poured the water on his leg and the entire crowd stoned him with etrogs. And we could suggest that this is the reason for the immense celebration that surrounded the water libation. The verse merely states that the water should be drawn with joy, but nevertheless, since the Tzedokim rejected the entire ritual, the sages instituted an elaborate celebration for the entire event, doing it with unparalleled fanfare, much like the custom surrounding the Omer offering. The Rebbe explains that the Simchas Torah was all surrounding the pouring of the water, and it was enacted to sort of prove or stick it to the Tzedokim who rejected, and to demonstrate in the most public way that we reject the attempts to overthrow the oral tradition of the Torah, and we remain steadfast in our connection to the traditions that were passed down from Moshe to the Jewish people, from teacher to son, from father to son, teacher to student, father to son, throughout the generations. То есть это было то же самое, как с Омер. Не было точно написано, а в то, что была группа, которая была против всей этой традиции, специально решили сделать какой огромный фестиваль вокруг этого ritual. Now, the Rebbe adds another part. This is, by the way, a talk of the Rebbe that we're reading together. This was also the reason that they would arrange significant repair in the temple courtyard. If you remember, one of the first bits that we read, that I think Marina was reading, it talked about the preparation for the Simchat Bet HaShueva, for the drawing of the water. It talked about renovations and repairs in the courtyard. What were these repairs, the Rebbe tells us? The Talmud relates that there were protrusions in the walls of the courtyard, and each year they would construct a balcony, allowing the women to gather on the balcony and witness the celebration while the men gathered on the floor below. То есть они специально строили балкон, где женщины, чтобы женщины тоже могли бы посмотреть, что там происходит. From a perspective of biblical law, women are obligated to come to the temple only once in 7 years. Про законы Тора женщины не должны прийти в храм больше, чем один раз в 7 год, и это было для Хакел. Хакел было раз в 7 год, когда все евреи должны были это sabbatical. And the entire Jewish people would have to come to hear the Torah reading from the king. And so according to the law, a woman only has to come once in 7 years. And this time when they came to the temple was not one of them. And nonetheless, they made such a big deal about it that they even built special porches for the women to come. Даже если не было закон прийти, они сделали такой big deal, что они строили специально такие балконы, чтобы женщины тоже пришли. Otherwise, we find only one other instance in which a special place was arranged for the women to participate in the events at the temple. And that was the Simchat Bet HaShueva. So for the Hakel gathering, it was there. And the only other time was for Simchat Bet HaShueva. And in Rashi's words, so that the women should be able to stand there and witness the celebration. The explanation is, as we said before, the Tzedokim objected to the entire ritual of the water libation, and therefore the sages made it into a fundamental part of Judaism and created this entire elaborate celebration, ensuring that women participate as well. All to emphasize the mistake of the Tzedokim. So they made this whole celebration an essential and integral part of Judaism just to prove that the tradition of Torah is as important as the Torah. Все это строили только чтобы показывать все, что традиционная oral Torah is just as самое важное, как Torah сам. And obviously, when all the details of the drawing of the water are carefully carried out according to the instructions of the Torah, it is a great reason to celebrate. The Rebbe adds another point. I think that's all the sources that you have. The Rebbe adds another very interesting point, and the Rebbe says like this. The Talmud talks about these significant renovations and improvements that they erected a balcony just for the women so that the women can come. Да, они строили этот балкон специально для женщины. Что это нам учится? Что? The foundations of Judaism is the belief that the written Torah was given along with the oral traditions to Moshe. Мы верим, как евреи, что Бог дал Моше Тора вместе с устной Торah. We believe that both were given to Moshe and passed down to us. Both the written Torah and the oral Torah. As a Jewish person, that's an eternal belief, right? That's a foundational belief that we have. But throughout our history, there were various groups of Jewish people that questioned the Jewish tradition and claimed that they follow only the original Torah. Били в нашей history. Разные группы евреев, которые решили, что им важно только письменная Тора. И все остальное не очень важно. And they developed their own elaborate, и много раз в Торе непонятно, что там написано без этого oral tradition. You can't understand it without the wisdom of the Chacham. Да? Без этой мудрости нашего Chachamim, это очень трудно понять, что там, what did God mean, да? Да, что речь это? And they intended to keep only those things, and they made their own elaborate interpretations, and they preserved only the very basics, ignoring all of the other, what they called superstitions and imposters and impositions that the rabbis have given us. But if you look at history, the only groups of people that survived the test of time are the ones that honored both the written and oral Torah. The ones that honored both the law of the Torah and the traditions of the Torah. The oral tradition is what keeps us and helps us persevere until today, and will continue to help us preserve into the future. That's why Tevye is saying tradition. He knew it, and he actually says, why, you ask? It's a balance. Tradition keeps us together. So in the custom of Simchat Bet HaShoeva, we see how much Yiddishkeit values and treasures traditions. В этом ритуально видно, сколько Yiddishkeit сохраняет наши традиции. If there was a group of people who rejected a custom, если была группа людей, которые, how do you say rejected? Отрицали вот традицион один, мы строили целый ритуал из этого, чтобы показывать им, что они неправильны. Just to prove them wrong, we build this huge ritual if there was a group that rejected the ritual. And the custom of Simchat Bet HaShoeva continued with all the fanfare until the destruction of the second temple. And then, because there was no more offerings, when the temple was destroyed, the custom stopped. И это ритуал, вот традиционно остановился до конца, до destruction, до второй храм. А потом, потому что не было храм, это не было нужно. And then, in 1980s, the Rebbe established a new custom. On the first evening of Sukkot, he shared a special talk, and he shared with everyone that while we are in exile, когда мы живем в галут, we are obligated to celebrate Simchat Bet HaShoeva because every person has inside of them a spiritual temple. Каждый человек имеет внутри духовный храм. И поэтому Ребе рассказывал, учил, что поэтому нам очень важно продолжать это ритуал, традицион в Симхат Бет HaShoeva. И этом год началось снова. Где? В Crown у Rebbe. And from that, the Rebbe started that because we each have a spiritual temple within ourselves, we have to continue this ritual and bring this kind of joy. And from that year, every night of Chol HaMoed Sukkot, and the Rebbe said because the ritual was done outside in the courtyards, we have to do it outside. And so they closed off the streets and they brought the bands, and for many, many years. And now, what do we see now? Now it became a custom not just of the Chabad in Brooklyn, but everywhere in all the Jewish communities. Everybody has taken on this beautiful tradition as well. And the Rebbe says that because women are the... Well, wait, I'm going to do that in the next one. Hold on. Yes. We're going to move on to the next one. I'm going to connect this concept of women and tradition to a small part of Bereshit. Okay? So, hold the thought in your mind about tradition and women, and how women were invited to celebrate, and how important it was for them to make a big deal, even to make sure that the women were joining. And we'll connect that with a small idea of Bereshit, and then I'm going to let you go because I think I overdid my time. In the story of Bereshit, we open up with the creation of the world, and the most important part, Hashem created Adam and Eve. Adam and Chava. Adam and Yeva. And the Parsha tells us of the first mitzvah, Первый закон, было к Адаму. It was to Adam. And what was it? Do not eat from the Eitz Hadat. Don't eat the apple. And very short time later, what did he do? He ate from the apple. And actually, it's interesting to note that this command was only around for 3 hours. Because if you look in the source, which I will read to you, the commandment was given in the 9th hour of the day. How was Adam created? In the first hour, his dirt was gathered together. В первый час собрали землю. In the second hour, второй час, his form was formed. Форма была сделана. In the third hour, третий час, torso was made, this part. In the fourth hour, his limbs were attached. Четвертый час, конечности. In the fifth hour, his orifices were opened. In the пятый час, все открыто, вот, нос, all the openings. And in the sixth hour, шестой, he got his breath. He received воздух. And in the seventh hour, седьмой час, he stood up on his legs, он встал на ноги. На нога. Встал на нога. What? This is the source from Avos the Rabbi Nasan Parak Aleph.
It's oral.
Oral, yes. And in the eighth hour, he was paired with Chava. Восьмой час Бог сделал, создал Chava и дал Chava. And in the ninth hour, he was brought to the garden of Eden. He was brought to the Eden. In the 10th hour, he was commanded not to eat. And in the 11th hour, he disgraced himself. And in the 12th hour, he was driven out and left, with which fulfills the words of Psalms, man does not even spend one night in an hour. So from the time that God commanded him not to eat until he ate it, passed only 3 hours. So he failed this first mitzvah. So Chachamim tell us that when Hashem, okay, so fast forward, okay, so Miznaim at the story, he told Adam, don't eat from the apple. Adam told Chava, don't eat from the apple. Chava said, don't eat it, don't touch it. And then they transgressed. Fast forward many years when Hashem was giving the Torah. What did Hashem say? The sages tell us that when God gave the Torah, когда Bog nam dal Torah, he told Moshe, on Moshe сказал, so you shall speak to the house of Jacob and tell to the children of Israel. Вот так будешь ты должен говорить, да? Говорись дом Яков и скажи детям Израиля. And our sages explain that the house of Jacob refers to the Jewish women. И Хахамим объясняют, что дом Яков это женщины. Meaning, Hashem commanded that Moshe speak to the women first, to ensure that there's no repetition for the sin of the tree of knowledge. А что Бог говорит? Слушай, в прошлый раз я мужчин сказал сначала, а кончилось не очень хорошо. Last time when I told the man first, it didn't end very well. В этом раз, чтобы Тора сохранилась с вами, скажи сначала, скажите, расскажи все женщина, а потом все остальное. Yeah, but she added the part, don't touch, and she was a second hand. She heard it second hand. So here Hashem says, tell Chava first, because if she hears it from me herself, she'll know the command, she'll understand the command, and she will guard it, and she will make sure that the men are also guarding it. So if we want the Torah to be guarded, женщины сначала. In other words, if we'd have just told Chava first, don't eat from the tree, we wouldn't be where we are now. Elisheva wouldn't be suffering right now, whatever is happening to her. Let's think about her and
just has to pray again.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind. What is the lesson that we're learning about this? In this story, the Torah is teaching us how to properly conduct a Jewish home. Потому что словами было дом Яков. Эта история нам учит как правильно строить еврейский дом. Every Jewish home has to be a miniature sanctuary. Каждый еврейский дом должен быть как маленький храм. Место, где Бог чувствует себя комфортно. A place where Hashem feels comfortable for himself. And because the character of the home is set by who? Who is the Keret Habayit? You know what a Keret Habayit means? What does that Keret Habayit mean? Not the crown. She is the foundation of the house, we say. The Keret Habayit is the foundation of the home. She builds the house. Maybe the man puts the wood up, but she builds the home. You know the difference between a house and a home? He might build a house, but the woman builds the home. And because of that, Hashem says, I rely on the women to build this mini sanctuary. I rely on the woman of the home to ensure that I feel comfortable coming and spending time there and gracing this home with my Shekhinah. I rely on the women for that. Go tell the women about the Torah first, because they are the ones that will ensure that the homes will shine with the Torah light. And so the Rebbe comes and says, it's our duty and responsibility to inspire, most importantly, who? Women. So that the women are inspired to fill their homes with Torah, with mitzvot, and education. And actually, the Rebbe brings a quote, which is quite startling, can be. He quotes, this is actually from the Hayom Yom, and they quote the Rabbi Shalom Dover of Lubavitch, and this is what the Rebbe says. My father, Rabbi Shalom Dover of Lubavitch, this is the Rebbe Rayatz talking, proclaimed out of Farbrengen, just as wearing tefillin every day is a mitzvah commanded by the Torah to every individual regardless of his standing in Torah, to just samekak mushin dolgen, yes, dolgen adiet tefillin, неважно если он соблюдаешь или нет. Every whether he's deeply learned or simple, если он много знает, если он очень how do you say learned? Учится или нет? No, it's a noun. It's ученый. I know a little bit of Russian to know that that's not a noun, not a verb. Ученый человек или просто очень простой. So too, it is an absolute duty for every person to spend a half hour a day thinking about the Torah education of children. The Rebbe doesn't write your children, it says of children. And to do everything in his power and beyond his power to inspire children to follow the path along which they are guided. So the Rebbe says, just like the man is obligated to wear tefillin every day, неважно если он ученый или нет, каждый человек есть должен думать каждый день минимум 30 минут об education, образованием детей. And that's why the Rebbe says tradition is important for women to know. The women are the ones that are going to make sure tradition comes in the house. That's in Chabad Shueva. The woman had to be there to learn for themselves how important tradition, Jewish tradition is. And to now, and Simchas Bet HaShueva comes right before when? Parshat Bereshit, where we hear and we learn about Adam and Chava, and how we see that later on, Hashem says, let's do it differently next time. When it comes to learning the Torah, we're going to rely on the woman. She's Akeret Habayit. Whatever house she finds herself in, whatever home she's building, she has an obligation. Hashem is relying on us to ensure the future of our children, of our nation, not just to give birth to them because they come from the women, but to raise them to remain in the path of Hashem and in Torah. And for that, we need to honor not just the law of Torah, but the tradition of Torah as well. So tonight, it was kind of like a mini Simchat Bet HaShueva. We had joy in our sukkah, joy in seeing each other, singing together, learning Torah together, engulfed in this mitzvah itself, just sitting around in it. And I guess that gives Ruth an extra zchut that she got today, giving us this mitzvah.